the narrative is breaking down in the U.S. anyway. Um, yeah, we've talked about this earlier, but now we're getting people like Witkoff and Hesketh and now Tulsi Gabbard are saying things that were forbidden, until now, until this new administration took power. Things that we knew about, that we've talked about, and that have been widely discussed in the alternative media. But and now at least a large segment of the population, we'll call it kind of like the Red America, is hearing it for the first time, and that it's affecting them. Yeah, I think one very good example was one name I didn't mention was J.D. Vance, and in that debacle in the White House, debacle for Zelensky anyway, he spoke of the press gangs. He didn't actually use that term, but it was clear that's what he was talking about, and that he had seen on it. He had been watching those videos, and they had really impressed him. So as a result, those videos have become available, or have been discovered by a lot of people on social media, on X, and I'm sure other social media networks as well, or platforms. And it's, for a lot of these people, it's mind blowing. It's the first time they've ever seen it, and they're having trouble digesting it. I looked at some of these threads, and they say, "Well, wait a second, what's going on here? I didn't know this was happening." And someone would say, "Well, probably it's happening in Russia too." The answer, of course, is it's not. If it had been, it would have been trumpeted very loudly and exaggerated. But we just don't have anything equivalent in Russia. So that's just one example. And then we had Hegseth say recently that when asked, who started the war, he said it's complicated. That's not an answer you would have ever gotten from anybody, Republican or Democrat, under the previous administration. And Witkoff has gone on and said that it was provoked. Tulsi Gabbard recently, the new director of national intelligence, spoke of the widespread suppression of liberties in the things that we've talked about, the banning of political parties, the suppression of the church, and so on and so forth within Ukraine. And this is getting through. I think you can see it. There was a poll recently taken, and I think we'd probably see this trend continue if the poll's taken again in another week. But it showed that now, I believe it's 34% of the U.S. population considers Russia to be an ally. That's a huge shift. That is a huge shift. And, most of it, of course, is among red states, but some of it obviously extends to the independents and Democrats as well. So yeah, there's that. And then there was another question. It's like, who should we support in the Ukraine war? I think it was still just barely a plurality said we should support Ukraine at 52%, but 44% said we should be neutral. 4% said we should be supporting Russia. So, still, we got a long way to go before we become truly pro-Russian, and we don't need to be that. I think that's often the wisest position for a country to take that's not party to a conflict is a neutral position, with some exceptions. But that shows that it's basically split between people who don't think we should support Ukraine at all and others. And then I'm sure when you talk about support Ukraine and you ask, well, are you willing to give up so much of your tax dollars for this? I think that support would go down. Sometimes people think of it as just sort of like, yeah, I stand with Ukraine without thinking about it. Anyway, all those statistics show a major shift, and I think it's a result of the breakdown in the narrative that we're seeing. And that's immensely important. At the beginning of this, we're saying that, if Trump goes ahead and he does these things, maybe he does extend an olive branch to Russia and so forth. But if the narrative remains what it is, any change that he make will not be lasting. It'll be like Obama and the JCPOA. He reached this deal with Iran, but did nothing to change the narrative. And I think that goes a long way to explaining, not entirely, but it goes a long way to explaining, why the JCPOA didn't hold. But if we have a fundamental shift in the narrative, and the narrative really in this postmodern world sometimes is more real than reality itself. I mean, it has more force then it shapes minds and attitudes and therefore policies and real world. It has real world consequences. So I think this is hugely significant.
Do you think this shift in the narrative was triggered by the fallout of the Zelensky White House Oval Office media debacle?
Oh yeah, most definitely in part. Yeah, that seems to kind of open the floodgates. But these statements, we've heard statements from, for example, from Marco Rubio earlier. There were already cracks in the edifice. There were already, and J.D. Vance and so on were saying things that were forbidden. But I think it's really kind of achieved a critical mass at this point. And yeah, we're seeing maybe an imminent collapse, at least in Red America, but I think it's going to extend. It appears to be extending beyond Red America.
Right. I saw Donald Trump Jr. repost, I think it was Lord Bebo on X, just the list of just video after video of these press gangs and them beating up these poor men that they pulled off the streets. It is really difficult to watch it. It really is hard.
It's horrifying.
Right.
It's kind of it's sort of the Ukrainian equivalent of the TikTok videos about Gaza that had such an impact on young people, especially young Democrats in this country. It's like these videos are starting to have a real impact on young conservatives and conservatives in general in this country.
Yeah, it's indefensible when you watch it. You just say this isn't okay. We can't be supporting this. Mm-hmm. So it really has, and I know Elon Musk has posted about it as well. So I agree. There's this flood, and it's so great because for us in the dissident media, we've been talking about this for a long time, and it's just we don't have a megaphone like these people do. So now it's finally out there, and I think you're right. The truth is finally coming out. But what's so crazy is you're seeing what's happening in Europe. Zelensky goes running to Keir Starmer, and Keir Starmer is just saying, "As we're with you as long as it takes.
Yeah.
We have to stand with you." Macron is the same thing. And they're talking about building up this coalition of the willing, and it's just insanity at this point. It's like you can't. The truth is out, and but they still are doubling down behind this false narrative, but they can't succeed, right? The writing's on the wall for them now. Can they hold back that dam of the truth as it starts to come out of?
It's going to be a challenge, it looks bad for, I think, many of the current governments, administrations in Europe, and for Zelensky. But they do hold the levers of power, and they can fight. And the media space in Europe is much more tightly controlled than it is in the U.S. right now. I mean, the U.S., we do have, we have alternative media in both places that are, obviously not part of the mainstream. I don't think we should, in any way, underestimate or downplay the role that alternative media, dissident media, of which we're a part, has had. Because it seems clear to me that people like Vance and Musk, they have actually been watching some of this. And that's where they're getting their information, because they wouldn't get it from the mainstream media. Where did they get it? I think they got it from alternative media. So alternative media, finally influenced somebody who had a megaphone, and now we're seeing the consequences. Now, that there is alternative media in Europe, but we don't see that same, there isn't any administration in power, that's composed of people or, has high-ranking members that are listening to it. At least we don't see any evidence of that. Of course, the big exceptions are Slovakia and Hungary, but those are relatively minor countries. So the media landscape is just much more controlled within Europe. And we've seen again that these governments will fight dirty. I think Zelensky is clearly himself is in a very precarious position. But he has control over, certainly large elements in the army, the ultranationalists, his secret police, Even if the majority of the population there wants to see him go, and that's clear actually. I mean, that's even polls there show that he might just be able to hang on with support from these Europeans. Now, I think their days are numbered, but it's sometimes, just through, through, you could say, brute force or, the raw exercise of power, the banning of political parties. Governments can stay in a power long after they really lose their legitimacy. They can't stay in power forever. I think they eventually fall. But that's maybe what we'll see. Again, we're hoping that there will be a peaceful democratic revolution, a real change in policy. But every sign so far from the establishment in Europe and in Ukraine is to double down. I mean, the statements that Starmer made were really quite extraordinary. I mean, essentially, he was talking about, I think most recently, about creating a no-fly zone over Ukraine, which is essentially a declaration of war on Russia. It's an invitation to war. Let's just put it that way. And then they're all of them, Macron included, is talking about sending troops and the ceasefire, and it has nothing to do with they're completely ignoring what the Russians are saying. It's in the end, I don't think like I've said, because the military reality and the economic reality is against them, it's going to be hard for them to hold on power for all that long. But it's clear that they're doing everything they can to continue to support the cause and do whatever they can to, escalate. But even their powers, now that they don't have the U.S. at their back, and let's hope it stays that way, their ability to escalate is now greatly limited.
Surely this position that Macron and Starmer are adopting, it can't be popular within their own countries, is it?
No, I don't think there's any popular support for it.
Okay, so it's not popular. They have no leverage, no cards to play. They have no military to speak of. They have failing economies, and they are also, fueling a false narrative. We just talked about the truth is coming out. They're supporting what can only be described as an evil dictatorship in Ukraine. So why did they, if this is all true, that they don't have any military, they don't have the economy to pump it up, to backstop Ukraine. They surely they got to know that things aren't as rosy as it all seems, or did they drink their own Kool-Aid that much that they think that these press gang videos are real, or they haven't seen it, they don't understand the situation on the ground, and they don't have their best friend, the United States, that makes NATO. Without that, then you don't have anything. So, but they still are going doubling down. Why? And it's incredibly unpopular with their within their own population. So, are these guys? Do they think it's opposite day for them constantly? What's going on?
Yeah, well, we've spoken about the irrationality. They've thoroughly sold themselves to the notion of Western, now European supremacy, and I think a lot of them truly believe that the Russians are the Nazis and Hitler is the mustachioed gentleman from Austria and all of that. I think a lot of them really do believe that, but yeah, again, like I say, there is a widening gap between rhetoric and reality, and that's dangerous. The thing is, I don't really think they can do much to help Ukraine. If the U.S. truly pulls out, and there's a chance that we may get a declaration to that effect from Donald Trump today. He said that there was going to be a decision made today on whether to continue the flow of arms to Ukraine. It's continuing as we speak, but maybe many people are speculating that perhaps he'll say no more arms to Ukraine. If that happens, then there's just really very little that the Europeans can do to prevent a true collapse in Ukraine. I think there's no question about it. Now, the thing is, I don't even know how they're going to respond to that. I don't think there's really anything they can do on the military level, or if they do, it'll just be suicidal. But these people seem to be incapable of actually, they seem to be so deep within their delusions that they just can't wake up from them. And what we may see is like sometimes when somebody's adopted a belief or uh, an ideology that is utterly false, that becomes very detached from reality. Their main way of coping with that is rather than scrapping the ideology, is to just suppress any kind of contrary information. And I think we're already seeing that again. The banning of Georgescu's party in Romania and various efforts to suppress information within Europe. And that may be the way that they go. It's sort of like plugging their ears, we'll plug our ears and we'll continue to dream. Obviously that's not sustainable. That's not a realistic policy, but it's maybe what we'll see. Or I think we already are seeing, and we'll just see how far they can go with it.
Is there any historical parallel to what we're witnessing now? To me, it just seems so crazy. It's so insane what's happening right now.
I can't think of anything. I can't think of anything like this. It's almost kind of like a suicide cult has taken over. Well, it used to be all the West, the U.S. included, and now for at least for the time being, again, the Democrats might come in power, for reasons that we've discussed, or come back and try to reimpose everything. But for the time being, the U.S. is escaped it, or it seems to be is escaping from that suicide cult. But Europe has just like you see when one of the members of their suicide cult leave, the reaction is not, hey, maybe we're doing something wrong, but rather, he's a demon. Let's get together and build the walls around our cult compound a little bit higher and make sure that we don't have any more escapes. And nobody actually sees what's going on outside, and just maintain our vision.
Right. I wonder if the position that we're seeing a lot from Europe is that for such a long time we have compared Trump to Hitler in mainstream media. Trump is Hitler, Putin is Hitler, and now Trump's in power, Hitler's in power. So there's kind of this idea that the Europe has to fight against Russia and the United States. Is that kind of almost the way that they're viewing things? That now the United States is their enemy, and just the idea that we have a fascist dictator in the United States, Trump, the reincarnation of Hitler.
I haven't actually seen that language, but I'm sure that we will. We're getting close to that, and we've had. I think Kaja Kallas, again, she's the High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Public Security of the European Commission. We'll just call her the foreign minister for the European Union. She suggested that Trump was kind of again being influenced by the Russians. She was kind of trying to revive Russiagate, and even mainstream conservatives like Merz, the newly elected chancellor of Germany, is saying we're going to have to go it alone. He's not quite saying that we need to. Again, he was very, very pro-American, but not saying that we have to regard America as the enemy, but that we have to go it alone. But I think, probably in the near future, we're going to start to hear the rhetoric that you just described.
How are the Asians looking? How are South Korea and Japan thinking about this? Because we had that crazy little military coup that happened in Seoul 3 or 4 months ago, and
that did not succeed.
Right, and I don't know where Japan's position is, but they are, I guess, NATO observers. They're not officially NATO, but they have some type of status with NATO as well. So how do they think this is as crazy, or are they going along with the West?
I actually have not heard, but that's a very interesting question. I'll look into that.
Well, the fact that you haven't heard probably means they're like, this is getting a little crazy.
Yeah, they're probably not. They're probably being very careful about what they say. Unlike the Europeans, they're not coming out and condemning the administration, which again, it just seems very, very foolish. The whole thing was really unnecessary, and it showed just a tremendous arrogance, particularly on the part of Zelensky. But I think it's true of all the European leadership to one degree or another. This was avoidable. I mean, he could have gone there and been humble and made nice and signed the agreement, knowing that it could never really be implemented. That's actually what Boris Johnson's advice was. Just go ahead and sign it, because nothing's going to happen. And I think he's right. I think Boris Johnson was right about that. That would have been very, an intelligent course of action. But there's this tremendous arrogance, that this, which is is not founded on reality. I mean, he is utterly dependent on the U.S. It's just stupid beyond belief. But again, we hear echoes of the same arrogance throughout Europe now. I mean, they don't amount to anything. I guess they still believe that they're exceptional, and if we just increase our defense budgets by a certain amount, and in a couple of years we'll be the great military power. But I wouldn't hold my breath. It's not going to happen.
Maybe they're all on cocaine.
Guys, thanks for listening. Please like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. And if you haven't checked it out yet, please check out my website, nobliski.io. You can look at the pinned comment below. It's something that I think you'll find useful. Even my dad uses it. My wife uses it. Instead of Googling things, you should be using this website because you get access to OpenAI, Perplexity, Anthropic, DeepSeek. There's hundreds of models that you can use. It's what I use to create the thumbnail images, things like this. And the greatest thing about it is there's no rate limits. There are no subscription fees. It's free to try out and use. You get free tokens every day. So if you're not a heavy AI user, you will never have to pay for anything. But this is really my passion project. I really want to get it off the ground, and I think you guys would like it. So yeah, check it out. Let me know what you think. And if you have time to download the apps and give it 5 stars, that'd mean a lot to me as well. Thanks a lot.